Hi my friend, for my tutorials I have to recreate completely finished tracks based on Beatport Top 100 songs every single week. To be able to finish high quality songs this quickly, I always depend on the same starting template in Ableton. So today I'm going to break down the latest version of my template so you can learn the secret tricks and techniques that go into a highly optimized production workflow. Stick around until the end of the video for the 3 tips I'd recommend that you keep in mind when developing your own template, so you can take what you learned from this video and apply them as quickly as possible to your own workflow. And if you want to download the template in this video, there's a link in the description to grab today's template, as well as over 21 full project files based on tracks from the Beatport Top 100 charts, with new files being added weekly. So we'll just move through the top to the bottom. So first thing is I always have an arrangement track set up with like a typical song arrangement with these empty MIDI clips: intro, sub, break, drops, breaks, drops, build down, outro. And then what I have here is a spot for the reference track. So I make sure I don't have too much going on here in terms of like any processing. I want the track to sound as clean as possible. I just have a spectrum so I can kind of have a look at any of the frequencies and how the overall track looks. It can be useful. And then what I've been doing lately is making sure that the reference track is -6 decibels reduced. This way, what I've been finding, before I had it at 0 and I was everything to 0 and I was running into like crazy or saturation problems. So this is helping contain that quite a bit. And then one of the first things I'll do is once I drop the reference track in here, I'll work with this arrangement track here. Almost use this as like a little puzzle piece, moving things around, shortening sections, elongating sections, whatever. This way I have the reference in here nice and set up, and I have this arrangement track with these empty MIDI clips color coded so I can jump between sections of the reference really quickly. It's particularly useful, say, when I'm building up the drums. I'll usually look for the intro and like kind of set up a loop marker here and build out the drums against the intro or against the outro. So we're kind of really focusing on that. Speaking of drums, the next thing that I have set up is this drum group. So there's a couple things going on here. First is on the group. What I've been really loving is this compressor and this K clip. So I have the compressor turned off. Usually what I'll do is build the track, and then near more of the mixing stage, I'll flick this on. And basically it's really cool. There's like a AI-ish element to it. So I'll just hit magic, and then I'll select drums, and then either do moderate or gentle, and it'll listen to the drums and set up the compressor settings. And then from there you can just kind of dial it in as you. This is helping reduce the dynamic range, and something I've been also trying to do quite a lot lately is less layers but make it still sound full. So compressor really helps with that, kind of like the subtle details of the track, kind of glues things together also, and this way you can get a lot more out of less. And then I'm always running into a K clip, and with this I'll be adjusting the input so that I'm getting about a decibel clipped. One thing I've been doing too is playing between the smooth, tube, and tape presets, just a way to add like this nice like saturation, which can also make it sound a bit more aggressive, or add some nice character to the drums as well. Then moving on, I usually don't touch any of this. Then once I start building up the track, this is generally the kind of layout I'll usually do. So I'll start with the kick, move down to the open hat, etc, etc, etc. But it's possible to move it around. What I have set up here is a couple of things. I've set up each one of these elements so they already have like the most typical pattern set up, so that I can really quickly get to working on the tune. So over here on the kick, most tracks are going to have the 4 on the floor, right? So I have it set up so that this is already there for me, and I can move on really quickly. In terms of what I have on the actual channel strip, what I have is this little selector. So once I build out, I have like a bunch of different kick samples in here. I can switch between it like this if I'd like to, as well as jumping into the actual clip. And I only have one thing set up here. So what I've been doing a lot, and you've probably been watching the videos for a while, is stealing the kick sample from the reference, and then also using it like similar sound function, so I can find similar sound that sounds similar to that stolen kick. So what I have here is this R kick thing, and basically once I steal the kick, I'll slap it into here. And then one thing that's been really cool, I think I found from Production Live or something, what you can do is instead of just having the rolling off the high end, so like if you look at the frequency here, right here, if you're pulling this back, and you don't have the filter to envelope set up, it's just going to be a classic kick filter. It's going to just basically roll off a lot of the high end. So what you want to do there is like try to remove hi-hats or melodic elements so you just have the kick by itself. If you turn on this filter to envelope thing, which I believe is under controls, an envelope, yeah, turn on the filter envelope and increase the amount, it's going to make the filter like move in this envelope style. And so this way it's removing the high end in a way that gets rid of the hi-hats and cymbals and snares or whatever there might be, in a way that's more natural sounding and preserves a lot of like the kick power, which is nice. And something that I might do sometimes is introduce this volume to velocity. It just makes it sound a little bit harder. And then there's some options for transposing it right within here. If I need to make that kick go up or down, increase the drive, adjust the level, anything like that, it's all within there. And then I have it set up so that there is an EQ 8 on here with nothing set up really. And the main thing is I have this set up here. So that if you see the 1, it's disabled. I have this here so that I can easily go like this or adjust it in like the automation lane. That to kind of create that like transition. So like, or like when the break comes in, but you want the kick there, but you don't want the kick hitting fully. This is set up to be able to like just quickly automate that feature of the which almost happens in every song I'm noticing, at least what I'm building. Can very quickly kind of do those micro transitions or macro transitions where you're dropping out the low end of the kick without having to throw on an EQ8 and everything like that. It happens almost every time, so I set up the template to always do that. And then I've been really liking this drum bus, so running the kick into a drum bus. Usually I pull down the saturation. I might dampen it a bit, but the main thing I like adding in boom, which adds almost like a sub sound below the kick, which could sound a lot fuller and more professional. Then if we look at the open hat, what I have here is the classic kind of like hat pattern, and I've set it up so the velocities are changing. So first hit's a bit harder, second's a little softer, harder, softer. Adds a humanization, kind of more dynamic feel to things automatically without having to do this each time. And then I have it so the pattern's already set up, ready to go. And then for the hats, I've been finding like the kick is so important to the tune, so I'm finding like stealing it and finding a similar sound is very important, getting something unique each time. But I'm finding kind of open hats and closed hats, some snares and claps, it's not as useful. So what I've done is I went through the process of like finding in my library a bunch of samples that I really like for the open hat here, and then also included one of those kind of like the things I just showed you with the kick, the option to drop in a stolen version and try to filter it out and use a stolen open hat as well. Same thing's going on here with the closed hat. Oh, and then in terms of any processing, then I have the standard channel strip that I usually do. So removing some of the lows automatically. Usually everything below 200 hertz I usually like to get rid of. That low end is up by the kick and the bass, but it's not always the case, right? So this way it's happening automatically, and very quickly I can just grab this and either dial it back a bit if I want to introduce more bass, or if I want to get rid of even more, then it's just already there ready to go, and that move is ready to move. Then I have this transient shaper, a side chain and gain and width, and these are all turned off so I can turn them on as I need them. The transient shaper, as I've been mentioning in a lot of the videos, is the free kilohertz transient shaper, just with like the main components mapped. This is really useful for a lot of the drums because then you can quickly tighten up the sound with the sustain. Sometimes you can increase the attack if you need to, make it hit a little harder, but usually this is here to just dial back the sustain. Then we got the sidechain, not useful on a lot of the drums, more on like the top loops, but it is here if it's needed, and it's a one knobber. And then the Ableton saturation, which I usually will introduce some saturation to kind of fill out the sound a little bit, add a little grit and texture to the sound. And then sometimes this width plugin, which again is the free polyverse wider plugin with the main components mapped to an Ableton rack, so I can quickly push the sound to the left and right, make it more stereo. This kind of comes into play I like a lot with the claps. You can push the claps left and right and then the snare down the center. We'll get to in a moment. So then moving on to the closed hat, it's set up so again the pattern you're probably going to start off with is there ready to go for you. Moving on to the snare, the classic snare pattern, so on the 2 and the 4, the 2 and the 4, the MIDI's already set up ready for you. That way you're just flicking between the sounds or using that selector. Same thing with the clap. This typical pattern's there for you automatically, so you don't have to punch it in every single time. So we have that there, and then I usually have room for a top loop. Jump in here. In terms of the processing, just the classic the classic channel strip, but I have the sidechain like ready to start just in case. The claps and everything like this, I have that turned off. It's usually not going to happen, but it's there if I need it. And then the ride, again, on that classic pattern. So if I do want to introduce a ride, it's there with a couple of samples that I would like to use. And again, with the clap and the snare, I built a small little library there. So not having to find claps every time from the full browser. And then another ride, which is like more of a looped ride that I like. So that way I can choose between the different rides if I want to introduce a ride. Then we're running into the next thing, which is a bass. So for this, what I like is very similar. We have that compressor turned off but ready to go, so I can just go to Magic, select the bass, and then listen to it. We're running to a K-clip, running to a similar thing, going about a decibel clipped. We're building it out. In terms of the actual bass here, what I have is the V-sub that I've been using. It's just a Ableton operator device, mainly just running a sine wave. Sine wave is the most purest form of like a wave, which gives you like the most purest form of like of the low end, which is super useful for the sub. It doesn't have to be anything crazy like that. And then just some options back and sustain, I believe, on another one of these transient per kilohertz things if needed. And then I have the one knob sidechain also set up here. So the sub with just one device here, we can play with the sidechain on that. Just volume, so that you can adjust the volume of the track without fucking around on the actual channel here. That channel right here. And then this like frequency roll off. So I have an auto filter here, and if you can see here, you can easily just pull it down with the device to remove some of the high end if you want to. Make room for maybe the mid bass, or if you're going for like a really just subtle subby low end, it's all here ready to go for you. And then in terms of the MIDI, I just have it set up so that there's an empty MIDI clip here, so that I don't have to like, you know, go like this and then right click and insert MIDI clip or remember the thing. There's already something here ready to go for me, which is nice. It's just all about speeding things up. And then within this bass group, I have things set up for like the two layers, so like the sub and mid bass layer. So what I have is this secondary channel, which is set up so that it's automatically instead of all ins coming from the subs like this. So this way, when I write a bass line on the sub channel, that MIDI is automatically going to be routed into the mid bass, so that I don't have to like go like this and have two layers of MIDI. This way, as I'm building up the song, if I make any changes to this layer, then it's automatically going to be reflected in the mid bass layer. The main thing is that you got to set it up so that all ins is set up to sub layer, and then instead of auto, it's set to in, so you can actually hear what's happening there. Then on that mid bass layer, I have this pitch device, so that if the sub, like the bass line that I'm writing, sounds really good at a certain octave on the subs, I can easily dial it, but that octave doesn't sound good on the mid bass layer. It's maybe way too low or way too high. There's an Ableton pitch device, so it's gonna move the MIDI up and down by an octave, just like this, instead of actually moving like the audio up and down. So it's literally just moving the MIDI, so it's gonna be nice and clean. Then I'm running that into this bass guitar that I sampled from like Trillion, which is like the Omnisphere bass EST. So basically, I just sampled a bunch of like C notes in that plugin. There's a bass guitar like preset that I really like, and I didn't want to load up Trillion every single time. It's just like a heavier plugin, so I just sampled it, threw it into an Ableton sampler, and this way there's a couple things going on. Like I can tighten up the sustain a bit really easily to try to make it blend in a little bit more, get it tighter with the sub. Something I might do here, and then also having the SMP distortion unit, and then I can add in some saturation this section, which I like the sound of. Then really big important thing when you're doing like the sub and mid bass kind of trick is having EQ rolling off some of the lows. So I basically have it at 200 hertz and I've ducked the Q a little bit. This is generally where I like it, and this way I don't have to do all these moves every single time. I write the sub bass line, the bass guitar sound I like is already in there, it's already cutting out some of the lows. If it's too the octave isn't right, I can quickly attach it there. There's an option to use that kind of transient shaper. There's an option to make the width, play with the width there, and then the sidechain's already dialed in so that it's pumping nicely. So this is something I'd really recommend, because whether you have your own sub sound and maybe you have your own mid bass layer that's really characteristic of your music that you like to produce, having this all set up ready to go, just man, so much faster. And then just a couple other things here. Then I usually like to throw everything into a melodic area. That's actually weird that I threw that there. I'm gonna have to fix that. Yeah, so I don't want this here. But again, we have the compressor and with the K clip. Similar idea, but I'm gonna over here, I'm gonna switch to synths and keys when dialing that in, and then I just have an audio track and a MIDI track ready, just so that I can start building everything out, melodic information of the track. And this is set up so that standard channel strip is ready to go. I usually have this as the default, so removing that low end, and then having the side chain so that I could pump, and I have that set up with audio and MIDI, and this is also the default track I have. So if I right click and say insert audio track, you'll see that it has like the same setup. And if I go here, computer's about to die. If I do the same thing with the MIDI track, boom, the MIDI track also has that set up. So those moves that I'm going to make almost anytime, removing the lows and having it sidechaining at least a little bit, is already there. And these things that I might do sometimes, playing with the transients or playing with the width, it's always there with, like, just have to turn it on basically. And it's turned off, so it's reducing the CPU. So that's nice. Last thing I think that I want to go over is the sends and returns. So I have the reverb here. I really love this Valhalla vintage reverb. It's just like the settings as it normally is, but the main thing that I do is I do like to change the decay so that it is going to quarter notes. And so this way you can dial in more reverb to your individual tracks because it is decaying in a musical way. So the reverb will hit, and then in a quarter note, the reverb is going to be gone. So it's making way for the next hit. So you're not getting that washed out bad, unprofessional sound that you can get with too much reverb when you aren't dialing in the decay in a nice way like this. And so what I got recently was this time converter plugin, which I definitely saw on a video from Dilby, a really cool producer. Basically what this does is it'll have the BPM like routed, so what 128, and you can select what kind of like value you want, so quarter notes or half notes or whatever, and then it's going to show the time like in milliseconds equivalent. So if you look at 469 here, if I end up working on a song that's 120, it's going to change the value automatically, so I know that a quarter note is 504 milliseconds, so I can click into here and then I can kind of dial that in, and now it's once again going to a quarter note, which is really nice. I used to like actually look up a BPM reverb calculator, and so it's nice to have it automatically in here. It'd be cool if you could like map it to the actual decay here, but you can't, that I believe. But either way, cool, really efficient, love stuff like that. The next thing that we got going on is a short delay. So I'm using the Ableton Echo at an eighth note with like a slight adjustment with this little thing. You can make it sound a little bit like not so rigid, exactly an eighth note. Just feedback at 23%, dry wet all the way, which is something you always want to have the wet maxed out when you turns like this. And so that's one, and then the longer one is at quarter notes, again with a little bit of movement, so it's not perfect, filtering out a little bit, so it's only affecting the high above 125 hertz. And the feedback's longer, so 60%. And then, which I don't use all the time, I'm not gonna lie, I have this I got this free chorus Juno plugin, just a chorus, and sometimes it can be nice to dial in some kind of chorus sound. Other than that, let's take a look at like the master. So on the master, what I like to have is this. So this is like an effects kind of module that I've almost built, and it's super simple. I have two endless smiles. The one is like more of a reverb washout, and then one has this like always rising kind of typical riser sound. And then I also have a auto filter here. So this way I can dial in that kind of washed out reverb sound on the master as like an effect. I can add in that riser sound easily as an effect. And then also I can do like kind of low pass kind of little tricks. So this is a very similar, almost like if you were DJing, you might cut the lows at a certain point. You might introduce some reverb or like a kind of like transitionary effect. This is all there, super fast, super easy. You can always replace them later with something a little bit more in depth, but this helps really kind of get that sound really quickly, which I like. Then I have a couple things here. So then this is my mastering kind of setup. So I have it set up so there's this compressor here, again the magic one, so much easier. So I can set it up to, usually on the master I'll do synths, leave it on soft or gentle, and then listen to the whole thing, and then run it into K-clip once again, looking for about a decibel clipped. And then this is the mastering chain. So I've been turning this off in place of this little cool, it's also free by the way, I should mention, compressor, running into Golfhouse Master, which is like kind of an EQ, magic EQ kind of thing. Can kind of fix some of the mistakes that I might have, make things sound a little bit cleaner. Kind of unnecessary, but kind of cool. And then the limiter, clipper, limiter kind of setup that I learned from my buddy Zach Adam. So what we're doing is we're running into the first limiter on the transparent style with true peak limiting off, and we're looking to basically just adjust the gain, so you're getting about a decibel of gain reduction. Then running it into a clipper, we're again looking for about a decibel clipped once again. Oh, and then also should mention the Pro L2, the output is set to -1, and then we're running into the K clip. We're going for about a decibel clip, so you adjust the in or out. You adjust the in until you're getting about a decibel clipped here. Again, the ceiling's at -1, so we're reducing it by -1. And then we go into the last limiter where we have true peak limiting on, set to either aggressive or modern. Flick between them, decide which is best for you. I usually like the aggressive one. And then you're dialing the gain, so you're looking for about a decibel of reduction, and trying to get between -8, -9 is like pretty nice in terms of like the short-term LUFs. So having this at short-term and then watching that. And then the last thing, which is really not useful for I guess anyone else, but I have this DP meter where I can set a reference level of -18 LUFs. I click this and it's going to drop the entire track down so that it's -18 LUFs. And this is just for when I'm recording like these like live stream. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to download the template in this video, there's a link in the description. But what if you want to apply what you learned here to create your own template, or to adjust the template that I've given you to make it more your own? Here are 3 things you should keep in mind to either adapt the template I showed here to your own unique way of making music, or if you'd like to start from scratch. The first thing is you want to keep in mind what are the main elements that you use in every single production. So in my template, you'll notice that I've grouped the drums, the bass, and then all the melodic elements. And then for things like bass, I have like the sub track that I always use and the bass guitar sound that I always use. And then same thing with the drums, having a small little library of kick sounds that I usually like to go for, hats that I like to go for, snares, claps, all that. By really identifying what are the core elements that make up your sound that you're using all the time, you can set up your template so that you have these things ready to go for you when you're about to produce a new track. The second thing is you want to have an idea of what are the mixing moves that you use the most often on a track-by-track basis. And essentially this is that idea of creating a channel strip that is automatically going to load up for each one of your audio tracks and MIDI tracks. For me, there's some standard things that always would go into this kind of mix as you go process, things like having an EQ there, having the transient shaper there, a width plugin, sidechain, these kind of things. This could be a good jumping off point for you, but for example, if you always use, I don't know, a phaser effect on every single track or most tracks, then you're going to want to set up your own channel strip to have that effect on there. And then the third thing that you're going to want to keep in mind are what are the elements and the mixing moves that you use sometimes, but not always. And this would be the idea of, instead of having it built into your template, making your every single thing that you might use on a track, all these effects loading up that you might use, it's going to slow down your template when you're loading it up each time. So what I'd recommend is also having an idea of what you use sometimes, and then saving that into your library so you can have it on the left side and drag things in. If you've seen some of my videos of when I start doing the effects and the transitions in the ear candy, I have this separately set up so that I can drag it in when I need it, individual elements like snare rolls or crashes, and those kinds of things. If you'd like to see a video on that specific idea of having a saved library in addition to the template, let me know and I can make a video like that. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, my friend.